Hello, welcome to Petro Media. I'm your host, Terrence, and today I wanted to talk about a topic that sometimes feels like taboo, and that topic is compression. With the advent of the new way things are done with music production, a lot of the behavior is to over compress your drums. And I'm not saying that compression is a bad thing because you want to use compression correctly, or at least in the best possible way. You can also use compression as a tool to create tonality, as I'll show in this track behind me in a little bit. One of the reasons why a lot of people keep chasing that sound that they hear with older records is because producers and engineers back in the day, they didn't necessarily compress the track on the way into tape or into Pro Tools through the console, because the files, they wanted to keep some of the dynamic range of how it actually sounds so that the music has a feel that basically gave it some life. So when we go to the modern era of production, what you find is a lot of the tracks, a lot of the music has drums that are overly compressed. Sample library creators a lot of times will compress the drums to create a certain type of sound. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, but if you over compress and destroy the tonality of the sound, you have to find a way to now add that back. Also, I find that when you're actually working with the track itself, what you don't want to do is compress the drums, because you got to remember, again, coming from a sample library or sample maker, even myself, some of my drums I compress when I'm processing them. But a lot of the drums that I have in my drum kits that I sell on my page, petromediainc.com, I actually don't compress too tough, mainly because I know you're going to compress them as well. So I take that into consideration when I make my drum kits. One of the techniques that you want to use when you deal with drums that are overcompressed is to stack your drums. Have the one that creates the impact and the other one that you have for the tone. But generally on the tracking of a beat, I try not to compress too much of each of the individual tracks. What I will do is on the sum, I will add compression there, because that's when you want to tame and control everything as a whole. That makes more sense to me. And when you look back at how we used to do things in the studio, it's kind of a similar thought process. You would track the music into Pro Tools or onto tape without adding too much compression unless you wanted a certain tone. Then on the mixing, you would add maybe some compression if needed, or add it to the summing, because that's when you're trying to control everything together in the final mix. So that's just kind of the idea. I think once I started doing that recently, it actually changed the way my sound felt, and it brought back a lot of what I was looking for in the past when I was saying, I want that old school feel. And I think that's what we're chasing when it comes to using older gear. Using things like the 5000 or the 1000 or anything like that, the SP1200, the ASR10, they all added their own natural vibe and feel to the sound of the drums, but it also did something to the dynamics. And overcompression is something that I feel has really limited and damaged a lot of the dynamics of the sound. Let's jump into what I'm talking about. So this is a track that I was working on. I started on this in the MPC 5000. I completed it there, and then I brought it into Logic to mix. It's about 17 tracks, and I'm just gonna let you hear like a bit of the beginning of it so you can understand when the drums come in. I'm just gonna try to skip ahead to the parts where the drums come in so you can hear the impact. So what you have here is the tonality of the track vibing with this dynamic of the drums. And I'm gonna turn off some things so you can actually hear the drums by themselves. Now, if you look at the track, I've put the SSL on every single track. I like the native channel strip too. It reminds me of when I was in the studios back in the day with the SSL 4000 and the 9000. And this This channel strip allows for a lot of creative decisions to happen. On the 808, as you can see, I added a little bit of compression. The ratio is at 6:1, but at the same time, that is the default that the channel is set to. If you look at the next one, when I go to 808 low, because I have two 808s on this track, I kept the setting the same. When we get over to the first kick I added compression just so that it had some tonality to it. But when I get down to the kick low, I have no compression on the kick low. I did not want to destroy the dynamic range of the lower kick that's supporting the upper kick, if that makes any sense. The first kick, I have some compression. The clap, I added some compression. The low kick, I added no compression. The snare, I added some compression. The hi-hats, I added a little bit just because I wanted to control it a little bit more because they were all over the place because of the way I played the hi-hats for this track. On the next one, I did the same thing for tonality reasons. These cymbals, I wanted them to have this big 80s feel to them, so I added some compression to that, and so forth. So in this case of this track, I added compression onto certain pieces, but I kept it a certain way so that the drums would have a certain vibe to them. On the summing track, I added neutron, and I did add some compression there. And then of course I have the Maserati, and I just set it to whatever it's set here, and I like how it feels. But if I turn it off, this is what the drums sound like. I'm gonna add it back. So it adds this punch to it, but I'm not destroying the sound of it. If I go to another track, which I'm gonna open up right now, and give you another example, if I come over to this other track that I'm working on, I'm gonna go ahead and turn off everything on the drums. I don't have too much going on, just again, Maserati and Neutron 3. On the actual tracks themselves, if we rifle through again, 808 has a little bit of compression. There's no compression on the kick, no compression on the snare, no compression on the hi-hat, no compression on hi-hat number 2. The hook doesn't even have compression. The verse part of the melody has a little bit of compression, and the vocals that I added in the background have no compression. Again, keeping the track as minimal as possible. And if you hear the drums naked, I'm gonna turn off all of the extra stuff, even on the master channel, what's going on. This is what it sounds like. This is the drums with no compression whatsoever. I'm just leaving the dynamic range to do what it does, because I'm gonna pull this over so you can see. I'm gonna pull over the track so you can see the drums themselves. If I zoom in, you can see the drums already had a fair amount of punch to them. Like they're huge. So it didn't make any kind of sense to add even more compression to that. I wanted that to breathe as much as possible. And that's kind of one of the things we used to do in the studio, is let the track actually have some life to it rather than over compress. And that's the point I'm trying to get at. So now if I play this and I add in the two things I added on the sum for dynamics, I always have extra stuff on here and I test and try things out, but I 9 times out of 10 will use Neutron and Maserati because I like the way they sound. And already the track has more punch to it. Neutron is set to have like a minimal amount of compression to it. And the Maserati, I like the way it feels. I know the compressor is set really high on the Maserati, but whenever I turn it down, I never really like the way it punches. But again, because every other track for dynamics for the drums is basically not doing any compression whatsoever, this is doing the heavy lifting. So then when I come over here and I start adding in all the stuff on the master chain, I'm just gonna turn things on bit by bit. You're gonna hear the dynamic difference in this track all the way down to Ozone. Everything has a crunch and a bite to it because I let the tracks have life. So again, this is a quick one. I just wanted to point out some things because I don't want you to think that I'm saying that compression is bad. It's a tool. We're supposed to use it in the most efficient and effective way. When you're dealing with sounds, especially nowadays, the sounds, you got to remember a lot of them are already super compressed, normalized. The dynamic range is already somewhat damaged. So you're basically dealing with something that you like the tone of. So if you have something that you like the tone of, add something to it. Layer those drums. Stack it, add something that gives it that impact, that low end that you're missing in the high end of this actual sound. The older drum machines, one of the reasons why I like using them as samplers is because they impart some things to the track, but also my behavior with them is different, so it adds that feel back to it. And I know because the drums that I'm putting in it, whether they're the older ones that I had from before or the new ones that I'm using, I always take that into consideration to do as much as possible in there. And then when I take it into Logic, I try not to overcompress, overdo anything. Unless, like I showed with the first track, I have a reason to do that because there's a sound that I'm chasing that I want to have happen in the mix. And then I'll add a little bit of compression on the sum. And otherwise, I do it the other way around. All of the tracks basically have no compression whatsoever. And then when I take it into the summing channel, that's when I add the compression. So this is a short one. If you like what I've been talking about, like, share, and subscribe. Join me next time. Also, if you want to support, I really appreciate you guys going to the website, picking up stuff as is. I have a new drum pack on there. I have a reasonable price on it. Definitely check that out. I think you guys are going to love the drums that I packed in there. I'm working on volume 2 as we speak. So you guys will have that soon. And yeah, check things out. Keep in touch. Comment below. Do you like to compress on every single track? Or do you like to leave the dynamics alone and only compress on the sum? Catch me next time. Look forward to hearing from you guys.